Good morning, everyone. My name is Billy. I am the founder and organizer of Bookstore Romance Day, and I want to thank all of you for being here. Welcome to the Harlequin Trade Publishing panel. Thank you to Harlequin for being a sponsor this year and for putting this panel together. It's a great lineup of authors. Thank you also to all of our sponsors, but especially to Bramble Books, who is our headlining sponsor this year. With that being said, just a reminder, one more thing, if you have questions for any of the authors, please put them in the Q&A and we will try to get to them at the end. Don't put your questions in the chat because they'll just get lost. So all of that out of the way, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to throw this over to John Jacobson and let's get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Jacobson. My pronouns are he, they, and I'm an editor with Mira Books and the moderator for today's panel. Thank you so much for coming. Romance has always been one of the great loves of my life, and I'm privileged to work with so many fabulous authors at Mira and Harlequin, including Sadie Kincaid, Tim Janofsky, Chintzia Higgins, and even Amy Daws, who's on our panel today. HTP Books stands for Harlequin Trade Publishing, and we're proudly sponsoring this panel. And we're featuring four of some of the smartest and hottest romance authors today. I mean, I'm biased, but I do think that this group is pretty amazing. Over the next hour, you'll hear from Sally Blakely, Amy Daws, Adriana Herrera, and Michelle Lindo-Rice. Each of them have written very different, wonderful books representing the breadth and scope of romance and what we're publishing at Mira. We'll allow them to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll get into some questions, starting specifically with questions about each of their titles, and then we'll open it up more broadly to some general questions and your audience questions. So why don't we start, Sally, if you feel comfortable introducing yourself first, that would be wonderful.
Hi, I'm Sally Blakely. I am the author of Friends to Lovers, which is my debut novel. It came out July 22nd. It feels like that was a lifetime ago, but actually just a couple weeks ago. I am a former English teacher, but I also feel like I've had every job under the sun, which really lends itself to my writing. And I currently live in Montana with my husband and our soon-to-be baby boy.
Thank you. And then Adriana, would you feel comfortable introducing yourself next?
Hi, I'm Adriana Herrera. I am a romance author. I write historical, I write contemporary, dabble with paranormal. My latest novel was A Tropical Rebel Gets the Duke, which was the last in my Las Leonas series, which was a historical. And I live in New York City, and I am also a trauma therapist by day.
And you have fabulous style, according to your office behind you.
Oh, thank you.
And then next, Amy, would you feel comfortable introducing yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Daws. I'm coming to you from South Dakota, which is I feel like the state no one ever visits or knows about or knows anyone from. I write spicy romance novels. I have 25 books now, I think. Lots of comedy, lots of feels, a lot of sports romance. If you like British soccer players, that's a big thing. My latest series is all about mountain men. I'm having a good time with that. I'm a USA Today bestseller. I am published in 12 different languages as well. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just excited to be here.
And then finally, but definitely not least, Michelle, would you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you?
Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Lindo-Rice, and I have written approximately 30 or so books. I am the author of drama-filled page turners that warms your heart, and I write both romance and women's fiction. I write for Harlequin Special Edition, Mira, as well as the love-inspired imprint as Zoe Marie Jackson. And I am a grandmother to a 3-year-old and soon to be twins, which I'm very excited since I'm a twin myself. And what else can I share? And I live in Delaware, where a lot of people say, "What is in Delaware?" I'm like, we're a great little hub if you want to visit all the states around, and I absolutely love living here. So thanks so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, you all are so wonderful already. I think we're gonna have to dive right in. So I think using the same order that you introduced yourselves in, just to keep it simple, could you all kind of go down and talk about, like, tell us a bit about your most recent release, and I think, you know, highlight what's special about it to you, whether it's the tropes or certain things you're doing, something you loved about writing it, whatever, you know, excites you to share it with everybody here.
So was I, yeah, right. I'm already forgetting. I think I'll go for my latest, my debut, Friends to Lovers, is about two best friends, Ren and Joni, who have been best friends their entire lives. Their families share a beach home on the Oregon coast. And shortly after college, Joni has to move across the country to New York for a job. And so she and Ren develop this plan to make sure they see each other regularly, which is to be each other's plus ones to various weddings, which is a plan that really, really works until something happens, and it very much doesn't work. And fast forward 2.5 years, they haven't spoken in those 2.5 years, and they are seeing each other for the first time again at their family's shared beach house for Joni's little sister's wedding, and kind of have to figure out if, you know, their friendship can be salvaged, if there's more there to salvage. And I loved writing this book because I had been querying for a while and was just pretty exhausted of that. You know, that's a tiring process. And I really decided I was just going to go back to writing something that was only for me. I never thought it would see the light of day. And then by the time I was done writing that, I was like, this has to be the book that I debut with. And I mean, I feel very lucky that I can say that now, you know, that it wasn't just kind of hopeful thinking, wishful thinking. But that's one of my favorite things about it for sure, is that it felt like very much mine until, you know, we reached the end of the writing process and was like, this is it. This is what we're going to debut with. And here we are.
Yay, I'm next, right? No, Adriana's next, right?
Adriana's next, yes.
See, I already forgot. I'm looking at the boxes. All right, go, Adriana. Sorry.
You can go first if you're ready to.
No, you go for it.
My latest release was Tropical Rebel Gets Duke. It's my first historical series. It is the last book in the series. It's a series that's set in the 1889 World's Fair in Paris, and it's revolves around this group of three best friends who are women from the Caribbean, who are all in different trades. The first book was a rum distiller. She was there to do business. The second one, she was an artist. She was there to present her work and get into like a very hot affair with the Duchess. And then this last one, she's a doctor and she's running an underground clinic for women in Paris in 1889 with some other compatriots. I like to write books that have a lot of history that, you know, we haven't read a lot about. Like there's not there before I published this series, there was not a traditionally published series with Latin women in a historical setting. And I'm really proud that I could do that with Harlequin. It was actually I started with my editor, who's no longer with Harlequin, who I love very much, Carrie Buckley. And yeah, the series is special for many reasons. One, that it has Black Latina women in Paris in a historical doing amazing things and having, you know, people that fall for them. And this one in particular, I started writing like right after Roe v. Wade was repealed, and I was very upset about it. And so I kind of was able to like channel all my rage into this book. And I really love it. I think it's probably my favorite of the three, although I love them all. And yeah.
All right, it's my turn now, right? Okay, my latest book, I have visual aids. 7-Year Itch. It is the second book in my Mountain Men Matchmaker series, which is a series about three brothers who all live on a mountain compound in rural Colorado. And one by one, their adult niece starts matchmaking them so that they can live happily ever after with whoever she deems worthy. Yeah, I was obsessed with Seven Brides for Seven Brothers as a kid. My sisters and I and my mom were obsessed with it, and I just thought it would be really fun to do my own contemporary version of mountain men who kidnap women and make them fall in love with them. There's no kidnapping in mine, but I did consider it. It was a part of the brainstorming process. So yeah, 7 Year Itches, Enemies to Lovers, super spicy, a little bit more spicy than book one, just because these characters, it just called for it, I guess. So they know each other because 7 years ago they met and he did her home renovation and he kind of screwed it up. And they've sort of hated each other ever since. But now she's recently divorced and kind of trying to get her life back a little bit. And they run into each other at an adult club, if you will. So things get spicy after that, and it's definitely contemporary rom-com with a little bit of heat, and I'm really proud of it. It just released in June, and the third Brothers book releases in November, and then I'm going to finish the series with the matchmaker herself getting a book. So yeah, it's been a fun family series, and I'm going to be really sad when I finish this last book.
Okay, so I just want to say, Amy, that I was a major fan of the Seven Brides for Seven Brothers as well, which is why I started writing a series. I need to finish it though with special edition. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the books and what I really loved about writing this. What I enjoyed about this book was the fact that I challenged myself as an author to come out of my comfort zone, and so this was a really ambitious project for me, and I'll be talking about a little bit about that later. But I always love to write books around themes around friendship, family, forgiveness, and there's all of that going on in A Summer for the Books. And on the front, they have written there beaches, books, besties, and secrets. And I thought that Mira did a great job with those four words of really it really encompasses a lot of what this book is about. And so you have two best friends, and the question is, what would make best friends not besties anymore? And so they had a secret that united them, but then years later, that same secret ripped them apart. And so this is definitely a summer for the books where they're working it all out. And I'll talk a little bit more, I guess, a little bit more about it later. Thanks.
You use that tagline so well, Michelle. I love it. And I think you lead us really well into kind of the next question. So there's we talked about the things that you all love about writing about romance novels, or at least like you started discussing it when talking about these books, since you're all passionate about them. But I think we don't always think about how romance is a really difficult genre to write. So if all of you could using the same order as last time, I guess, like, talk about like what's most challenging for you about writing romance, and how do you as a writer overcome those challenges? And you can talk about broadly your challenges with romance that you see, or you could talk about if you had one specifically with the book, because we all know some books trouble us more than others. I think however you want to take the question, we're interested in hearing your answers.
Are we going in the same order? Did you say, John? Sorry.
Yeah, I think let's just keep it up for now,
okay.
so that way
Perfect.
we're all smooth sailing. Yeah.
One thing that I really learned, my editor for Friends to Lovers, who is also no longer at Mira now, Melanie, really helped me with this when she read my first draft of this book, was that you can't have your two leads be too, not emotionally intelligent, but like they can't have a conversation that's just, that makes sense, right? That's like a rational conversation that you might have in real life, because then you don't really have a book who's going to keep reading. And so that's been, it was easier in writing book two for sure, I think, but in editing that, I was like, I don't want to dislike my characters, I don't want to be really mad at them the entire time I'm writing it because you're being so ridiculous. But that's kind of one of the best parts. And I think I've seen some of that in the few reviews I've read, right, where people get really frustrated with like the miscommunication trope or something, which I understand as a reader, but it's also almost necessary, right, to kind of keep you going. So that was something that was a big frustration for me in romance, but I hope, fingers crossed, I'm getting better at it. I don't know.
Well, if I'm being honest, probably the biggest challenge is like not having them bang in the first chapter. Although for Tropical Rebel Gets the Duke, I did manage to do it in the prologue. And but all jokes aside, although I do love writing a high heat romance, like if there's no banging, then I'm just like I can't make myself get out of bed to write it. So I think for me, depends on what I'm writing. Like I think with historicals, like the biggest challenge is I do a lot of research, like a lot of research. In large part because I am writing stuff that like people are not used to reading. I remember when I first decided to write historical, I had a conversation with the great Beverly Jenkins, and like her one piece of advice was like have a bibliography because people are not going to believe like these things happened. So I have to have like I have to do a lot of research, and sometimes it's kind of hard to remember like this is a romance. Like I have so much stuff that I've researched that I want to like put inside the book, so it's like a hard balancing. Like I have to kind of just like let the history kind of come into the story as opposed to try to like build the story around like the little pieces of history I want to put in. So that is challenging. Like the historical romances are just a lot more work for me. And like in general, I think my process, like I'm a what Sarah Simone coined this phrase, a panty liner. Like I'm a pantser, but I outline a lot. Like I outline and I change the outline as I go. So sometimes like my process can get a little bit chaotic in edits. And I do end up doing a lot of rewrites if I kind of like stick too much to like the original plan, then I end up just rewriting a lot. So yeah, I mean, I think part of like any genre is that you have rules that you have to follow, and you still have to make it fresh. You still have to make it good. You have to make it, you have to have the tension there. You have to have the banter. So like like any other like mystery or horror, I think it is kind of like that challenge of you have to deliver on every beat and also, make it fresh, make it fun. So I think it's like like writing romance is not easy, although people think we just kind of sit down and kind of scribble it on a napkin and like the book is done in 10 days.
This is off topic, but not really. But that what you were saying, Adriana, made me think of that Tyra Banks meme where it's like make it different, but also make it exactly the same. Like it's the endless struggle between the two of them. So I think you capture that really well.
And people like think like, oh, it's, like people know how it's gonna end. And like exactly, that's the challenge. Everybody knows how it ends, and and they still are like voraciously reeling it. That's because we're good at our job.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So like, if I can jump in. Yeah, so I think Adriana kind of answered what I was gonna say, which is it's that you know that there are certain things that have to happen in a romance, where you have the meet cute, you have to have the climax, you have to have the resolution, the happy ever after, and it's just making that creative. So that's I think is a little bit of the challenge, but one of the ways in which I work around that is by looking at the characters and whether it be their career, their different storylines, the different issues that they may have. And that's what brings, a different light into building the characters and their stories through the romance.
Yeah, it's funny because Adriana was mentioning getting kind of stuck in the weeds with like research and history and wanting to have that. Like that happens even in contemporary. Like right now, I'm writing the final book in this Mountain Men series, and there's so many family elements to it. I'm like noticing that I gotta stick with the romance. Like I'm like, nope, the couple is the main character, but there's so much I want to show. I want to show them this part of the mountain and the family and what the brothers are up to, and like update everybody. So it's a challenge. I find literally the whole entire process of writing a book really hard. I'll have these bursts of like words that just flow really fast and easy, and I'm like, yes, I can see everything how it's gonna happen. And then literally the next day, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. This is all garbage. It all needs to go in the trash. Like, it is a painful process for me every book. And every time I finish a book, I'm surprised. Like, I've done it 25 times and I'm still always surprised that I managed to finish and that I'm able to land the plane, because it doesn't ever seem like it just maps itself out easily for me, which is weird. You'd think it'd get easier the more we write, but I don't think it does. I think actually we just push ourselves harder and it gets more like, even now writing a book 4 in the series, I'm like, nope, I can't have them do that because that's too similar to book 2, or I can't have them do that because that's too similar to book 3. Like we're constantly trying to push ourselves. We're competing with ourselves all the time, just trying to one up what we've done before. But I don't know. I think like the pain is sort of the beauty to it. Like I like to say I bleed for the art. And if the more it hurts, I feel like the better the book is. So I think the day that I say like the book came really easy and it was really easy is like the day that the book might be a layup and I'm not giving it my all. So yes, it's all hard, but I think that's kind of the validating like journey of it. And it makes it really satisfying when you finish. God, that kind
Like,
of sounds dirty.
but like, there's a reason why we call them book babies, because it's labor.
Yes, yes, exactly.
That was perfect, Michelle. Adriana, you had your mic unmuted a bit. I just wanted to check and see if you wanted to add anything or if you were doing other things. No, okay, good. Also, you all spoke about that so well. And as an editor, I can attest you all work very, very hard, so much harder than anyone ever sees, which is also unfortunately part of the process. So I think like something that like I think you all are kind of touching on a little bit, but like I think would be interesting to think about more in the broader sense is like, where do you see romance going? And I think, and I think maybe also like, where do you see yourself going with romance? Like, where do you see the genre heading towards now? Where do you wish it was heading towards? And maybe talk about a little bit like what you're working on next or how you're kind of responding to all of that. So you can give everyone here not just an excitement about your current book, but maybe what's to come and how you're going to kind of respond to it all.
I definitely just want to continue to see, more and more voices represented. And I think, Adriana, you touched a little bit on this when you were talking about your book, but just audiences who haven't seen themselves represented. I hope that we continue to see more and more people represented and voices represented in the genre. I also hope that, and this is something I hope to do with Friends to Lovers, and again, hope to do with book 2, which I don't know what I'm allowed to say about it, but it's kind of another like beachy vibes book. But I hope that audiences continue to see it as something that can actually happen, right? That these love stories are things that are totally achievable in real life. Um, and it's not this kind of wish fulfillment. That's something that's really important to me in my own writing or in the books that I read, to remember that, I don't know, for me, a main goal is just to be like, this can happen, don't lower your standards. These romantic partnerships and these romantic leads exist out there. So I don't know, that's something that I want to continue to do, hopefully, or attempt to.
My cursor always hides from me. Oh my gosh, what do I want to say in romance? So many things. I mean, I think the big challenge always is making romance more inclusive, more equitable, more accessible, more visible, like creators who are Black and brown and queer and diverse, more visible, people to buy their books, to read them, to chat about them, all of those things that we've wanted to happen since forever. Although, I feel like it gets better in certain areas, and in some, there's still a lot of more work, like with everything happening in the world. But I mean, the direction it's going, it's hard to say. Like, I think about this constantly, like romance and what's happening in romance and the genre of romance is like 95% of my brain function. So I think a lot about these things. It's been interesting since the pandemic and book talk, right? I think like the thing that those of us who have been reading romance since our teens, like since the 90s, have always wanted for like the world to notice that romance is like this amazing genre. And I think this is the closest we've gotten to like the world noticing that romance is an amazing. I think romance now, I kind of see it as someone that's been in fandoms for like most of my adult life. I kind of see romance now, how it behaves like a fandom. Like I think there's like the way that it's just grown so much and it's become really kind of like there's business in being a romance reader, which is something that's happened like in the last 5 years. It's made it really interesting. I think like this like change of like indie, kind of like the KU or like the indie to trad pipeline, where so many books that are kind of like setting trends and creating markets and the indie space coming into trad has been interesting to see. And I think that's just going to continue because it's profitable. So why wouldn't you do it? But in terms of like taste, I feel like we're kind of like, I think romance always reflects where culture is at any given moment. I always say that if you want an archive of like how the language we had for like sexuality, desire, consent, relationship dynamics, just read a romance novel. Like if you want to know how we were thinking about all those things in 1985, read a romance novel. If you want to know how we were thinking about it in 2025, read a romance novel. And I think I see it like there's now like either very low angst, like readers are craving something very cozy, low conflict, like no third act breakup. I am a third act breakup evangelist, but like there is an appetite for like low conflict romance because the world feels like it's pretty intense. Or there's like very dark, books like dark romance is also having like a moment. Horror romance is kind of also cropping up, and it really kind of gives you like a sense of like that's kind of how the world feels, like very much like the extremes. So that's interesting to me, just those trends, and I'm interested to see where it goes because I feel like romantasy is kind of like its own genre. I'm kind of like, is it like 50 Shades when like 50 Shades created billionaire romance? It's like Sarah J. Maas created romantasy. Like, is that gonna like continue? Like, I don't know. I have many thoughts. Like I said, I could talk about this for 25 hours.
No, but I think you're summarizing like a lot of what's going on for sure. So it's an interesting time, which I feel like we're all saying all the time about everything right now, but but it's real. Amy, and how are you feeling about this, Amy, since you're the next one on our little lineup here?
Yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of what Adriana said about representation, and Sally touched on it too a little bit. I like to write a lot of plus size romance characters, so just seeing more body diversity in female main characters is really empowering to me. Even just describing like a character with flaws as a beautiful being worthy of love, I feel like is something we're craving. We're kind of, I think, all getting to the point where we're sick of the, super skinny models on magazine covers, and we're ready to, to just embrace more reality. I think that realism is cropping up a little bit more in romance, and I think that's cool. I like being a part of that. I also can only just write the books that are in my heart. So like whatever trends are happening, I usually almost always miss them because I can only write what I can feel, because writing is already hard enough. Like I'm not going to be able to chase down a trend and knock something out in the time it would take to be successful. So I just have to keep writing what works for me and hope that the readers that have found me want to continue that particular romance journey. But I do love how popular romance has become, and that people are just unapologetically reading smut everywhere they go, and they're happy about it. Like there's no longer that discreet covers kind of became a big thing for a while there, and I loved it because I can kind of see the appeal, but I also love the women who are happy to just walk around with a bodice ripper cover like the OG Harlequin covers. I just think that's great that women feel strong enough in their hobby that they're not feeling like they have to hide it from anyone. That's what I love.
And Michelle, what are you thinking about all of this? No,
And
you're
Amy,
good.
I'm so sorry because I think I jumped in the last jump space. I'm looking at my screen and I'm like behind Adriana. So I'm so sorry. I'm gonna try keep my space in line. Um, oh gosh. So I think a lot of people covered what I was gonna say, but um because I do agenting, I can say like romantasy is pretty hot right now. And we seem to be there seem to be a lot of trends towards the hockey players now. So as I think Amy really said that right, that even though there are trends, and I cracked up when she said she's missing a lot of them. I'm still very much a big supporter of writing what's in your heart to write. And I think she also said like your audience will find you. And so, for me, as far as romance, I I know it's a trope that isn't going anywhere. Um, it's a genre rather that isn't going anywhere, and that it is exploding, getting bigger. But what I actually do love, and I haven't read Adriana's. I read some of her books, but I haven't read this historical. I love the historical bent that's happening now, especially with romance. But I also do. Oh gosh, I do also love the dual timelines, and I try to play with that a little bit in my own book. It is not easy to do. So, I love that romance is always just reinventing itself, like you guys said, to the time and to what's going on now. It's really relevant. So, that's I think my little addition, if I remember the question right. Sorry.
No, you did perfectly. And I think I have a specific question for each one of you, and this like dives in greatly. So I'll start with you, Michelle. So you mentioned like A Summer for the Books is the first time you've written a dual timeline, and you talked about really liking it, right? You
Yeah.
also use like diary entries, and you have like that book within a book element. So you have like kind of a lot of literary stuff going on. So how did that change your writing process because you were using so many of these new techniques, and like what were like the good and bad parts of that experience because you were trying these new things?
Okay, so as a reader, I love it when I read it in other books. And this time it feels like I did a kitchen sink thing in mine, and it was it was very, very challenging. It was very ambitious. But I think I started to say that earlier is that sometimes when you're writing, you're like, how, I would like to. Someone, I think it was Amy who said you're kind of in competition with yourself. So you kind of like say, what can I do to challenge myself? So I love reading books about books. I wrote the Bookshop Sisterhood, and I was like, oh, I want to try this again, a different angle. And so I was like, "Ooh, what about a book within a book?" Oh, it sounds wonderful and amazing until it's time to manage it all. Luckily, though, what a lot of my author friends said is, and it is true that the best books are rewritten. So fortunately for me, I have a wonderful editor, Dina Davis, who was right there with me in the process because while we were talking through a lot of things, I I ended up adding multiple POVs where we introduced Lacey, who wasn't a part of my plan. So things that you don't originally plan happens while you're writing. Because Adrian, I think, called it panty lining, but I call it plantser because I plot a little bit, but I'm very much writing by the seat of my pants. But then I have a whole lot of things to fix. So a lot of that management phase really came in the editing process. I had to do one of the toughest rewrites I had to do because one of the things that we talked about was, and I think Sally mentioned this, which is making sure you're writing those likable characters. And there definitely was a big shift in the book this way. So I had to kind of fix it to even it out between the friends while giving them some great romantic elements as well. So it was just managing all the different storylines deadlines was very challenging, and making sure too that you come to a satisfying conclusion, because I think that that's what readers are looking for when they read your book, something that still leaves them with that warm in the heart feeling.
You spoke to that so well. And I mean, as an editor, I always love hearing people say that the rewrites or the edits are helpful. And I love that both you and Adriana and Sally, you all shouted out your editors, and it's so wonderful to hear that process is useful for you. Because you all are so talented, but it's like books and all art, right, aren't kind of made in a vacuum, even if we're all kind of introverts at heart in publishing. And speaking of Adriana, I would love to ask you a little bit more about in your most recent book. So you mentioned about, kind of writing some of this series in the aftermath of Roe v. Wade being overturned, and, just this larger global erosion of reproductive rights. So like, what do you hope readers can take away from your heroine, Aurora, and running this kind of underground clinic, her work with patients, and kind of like and kind of take what can they take away from like seeing this character like in history kind of doing this and bringing it into their own current experiences?
And I hope people can, I mean, the one takeaway is that history is not what we think it is. One of them, I think people have a sense that like the things that are happening today have only happened today. And like there are fights that we've been fighting for literally hundreds of years, and we win them and then we have to win them again. So I think like in a sense, like when this book came out was like February of this year. And I was like, this is not where I hope would be, when I started writing this book. But at the end of the day, I tried to like kind of like direct and thinking about like this is just kind of giving people context, like these are things that we've done before, and like we've done it together, we've done it in community, and like we can do it again. But just in general, this series, I think for me was really for my like Latina readers, for women who are from places in the world that we don't get to read about ourselves in context of like being having agency, like having careers, being intrepid. Like I tried to blend in as much as I could, hit like stories of women who I've found in history. Like I have like various extensive author's notes, usually with a lot of like the real history that's in the book, just to give people a sense of like, for us, like we've been doing amazing and interesting things for a very long time. And but like Aurora in particular, like I, as a person that's a trauma therapist and does social work, and sorry, my dog is like whining in the back. And working in communities that are with people who look like me, like it's really important to me to write hopeful stories about us and like our culture and the beauty of it. And so that is always kind of at the center of my writing. Like Apollo, who is the hero in the book, is also like a Black Latin man who is like the first Black Duke in the aristocracy. So there are a lot of conversations about like assimilation and all of that. But just in general, of being a woman that does hard work and finds someone that sees her and the value of her work and the value of who she is, and just really wants to love her and to help her like get what she wants. And so that to me, that's the kind of hero I always write. Like I always say that my hero, he's just Ken. He's just there to like make her life amazing. But to me, that is like really at the center of like my core story. It's like women who do things that are like hard and that they're very passionate about, and like the person that they find sees that work, sees who they are and exactly as they are, and just like wants to like love them and support them.
That's beautiful. And I think such a great way of thinking about romance, right? We so often think of romance as this, or people can often think of romance as like wish fulfillment but it really can be a transformative and powerful process for us as individuals to shine and grow more. And I love that you explore that. And I think that ties Amy into, you mentioned also as well, like you were talking about representation and plus size representation and, the joys of it. And it's something I think I'm thinking about both with you and what Adriana is talking about too, is like, what is it like to kind of explore plus size representation in different forms, right? Because you're not writing the same character each time, right? So how does that process work for you when you're writing a character of that background to like, decide like how to portray her differently, and like, how are you kind of figuring out like what kind of things you want to show readers with each kind of character in this process?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been kind of on a journey with like my plus size rep because the book that I think like broke out the biggest for me, Blindsided, I wrote Freya as a plus size insecure woman because I wrote like what I felt most of my life. So it felt like I was writing a real character. I was writing a lot of my own insecurities that I gave to her. And like that book is my most beloved book. Like I don't go to an event and someone doesn't say, "Oh my God, your book Blindsided is my comfort read." Like I hear that all the time. So it's that book I'm always trying to top. But I read the 1-star reviews of that book. I'm really gross, you guys. I actually read my 1-star reviews on all my books. I read those almost before the 5 stars. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm not well. But it's funny, there's a lot of people challenging me for just like, perpetuating this stigma of like, why does a plus size woman have to be insecure? And I was like, oh my God, they're freaking right. And like, I was like, yeah, good point. And it just made me challenge my own internalized fat phobia. And so that's been like where I've gone since then is like, so then my next plus size girl, I'm like, okay, she's going to be confident. She's going to have a different, like feeling about her body and her history with being a bigger character. And so like I do a lot of different things. I think there's room at the table for all types of plus size women because I think no matter what, I want my characters to be really relatable in the end. Like that's the most important thing to me. So if that means they have to have moments of insecurity for me to feel like they're real, I'll still write that because that's normal for me. That's my voice. And it might not be what people want to read, but it's like what's in my heart to portray. So I really kind of do a variety now. Like so I look at Freya as maybe a more insecure character that I've written, but then like 9-month contract, she's plus size and pretty secure. She has moments of insecurity, but for the most part, she loves her body and she's proud of like, her journey with her weight. And so I don't know, I just think it's good to represent everything and to show different things, and different people will connect with characters differently. So yeah. Yeah.
No, that's a great insight, and it's so real. Plus, like no character can be everything to everybody, right? Characters
Yeah.
are like people, and they are going to be individual.
Mhm.
And I think like speaking of like these kind of consistent themes, like Sally, I know it's a bit of a different take, but like you're like so you have a lot of weddings in your most recent release, Friends to Lovers, and I'd be curious for you like how what was it like to also like write so many different weddings in the same book, right? And how did you take what were you thinking about with weddings? Like did it make you kind of think about the structure of weddings and how it related to your characters, especially in a romance? Like kind of like because yeah, I think we're all kind of talking about like doing something that's challenging or taking something that maybe could be similar and changing it over time. So I'd be curious to know how that impacted you when you were writing Friends to Lovers.
That's a great question, and one I hope I have an okay answer to it because I don't know if I've thought a lot about the process of that. Also, I wanted to say, Adriana and Amy, I think Adriana, you were mentioning, we're kind of existing on this spectrum right now of like heavier themes going on in the world, right? And then we have these kind of lower stakes romances, perhaps. So I feel like this question might kind of bounce me back from these things that are like so central and so, top of mind for so many of us right now, to maybe the cozier end of things with the weddings. Um, I think that, I mean, for me, weddings or any sort of event, any sort of big thing you look forward to always feels so momentous. Like, I think leading up to it, you're like, something might happen at this, no matter what phase of life you're in. It's just this kind of demarcation of time. And so I think that was particularly important for Ren and Joni. But I also think it was so interesting to write these two characters who are really struggling in their own romantic lives, also struggling to come to terms with what they mean to each other, if they're just friends or if there's something romantic there. set against, these moments where all of these other people are declaring their love for each other. And they're there celebrating that while they are still very stuck in, their feelings for each other or lack thereof or whatever it is. So that was a really good way to, I think, structure the book. The weddings didn't really exist as much in its first iteration. So again, to shout out my editor, that was a huge addition that I think really helped to build up the book. And again, yeah, it was just kind of a great backdrop for how these two characters grow. I think particularly the kind of the main wedding, the present storyline is set around Joni's little sister, was pretty important because we're seeing this person who, her little sister Stevie, I think is kind of a cynical character, but she falls in love really, really easily. And her wedding is this huge moment of celebration and just kind of wondering why Joni can't do that, why it's so difficult for her. And Amy, you mentioned that one of the most important things is just making sure you write relatable characters. And so that was something that was huge for me with Joni, and I hope is relatable to a reader, right? Is watching other people fall in love. I think, maybe we've all been through a phase like that in our lives where it seems like it's so simple for everyone else, but everybody has their own love story and their own journey toward this that we're not necessarily privy to.
Oh, thank you. All of you are just so intelligent and amazing. It's really wonderful to hear you talk about your process. And Sally, I think you transition us really well into answering. We have some really excellent questions from the viewers of our panel right now. And I think they're probably going to lead us into that more light space. Although I think, right, like we're all balancing this like mix of light and challenge right now. That's just how the world is, and I think that's what romance does well. So, we'll see what comes out of it. But something that's come up a couple of times that I think would be worthwhile hearing from everybody is like what and who inspired you to become writers and authors? Like what led you into this world that you're so deep in now? And I don't think we have to go down a line. I think it's like as the spirit moves you to answer these questions or not, feel free to jump in if any of you have an answer now or want to go first or whatnot.
Well, one of the things that got me into writing was, I was a reader first, and I was that kid that went to the library, get a stack of books in the Harlequin romance section where I shouldn't have been, and I'd go back the next day with another, for another stack. And then in my 20s, late 20s or so, I was married at that time. And I was home a lot on my own and with my kids when I put them into bed. It was just a lot I was going through in my relationship at that time. And so writing became like therapeutic for me. And I just sat and I started writing the story that, my first story. And anyone that desires to write, there are many people that have that idea, I'd like to write, or they talk about it, or they start it, but in actuality you have to actually finish. So that's what makes it a book, is to actually finish the book. And so that was around that time, it was in my late 20s, where I actually sat and began writing for the first time. I had no idea what I was doing, as I learned later on when I learned about writing, but at the time I still felt wonderful that I accomplished writing my first book.
I can go off of that just because, Michelle, you mentioned writing for therapy, and my first book was a memoir about my experiences through recurrent pregnancy loss. So my husband and I had 6 losses before we finally had our daughter Lorelai, and so she's 13 now. So that was like, it literally feels like another lifetime, which is just so wild. But I think I just needed to write that story out just to get it out of my head and my heart and do a little trauma healing of my own. Um, so it's nonfiction. And I remember finishing it and being like, God, I would never pick up a book like this. Like I didn't really enjoy nonfiction at that time in my life. I loved romance novels. And I was like, I wonder if I could, like take a little bit of my own experiences and put it into a fiction and just have the ability to just make up whatever I want. And so then I think if I didn't have my own real story to tell first, I wouldn't have known I had the ability to put a book together. And so then after that, I was like trauma healing through my career. If you look at my books as a whole, like my first series is super angsty and emotional. And then my next series is a little bit lighter, but still lots of feels. And then I wrote a rom-com series. And so it's like you can just see me emotionally healing. And now I'm doing fireball shots at book signings. So that's a journey, folks. That's a journey. No, it's been good. I'm so grateful to writing and what it's done for me and my family and my mental health. So yeah, it's a fun thing to look back on and reflect. So
I'm a trauma therapist, so I don't write a lot about trauma because I try to it's my day job. But I will say that my first book I started writing because of the 2016 election. I was working a really hard job. I was working at a human trafficking program in New York City, and it was very stressful. And so I really just needed something to like that made me happy. And romance has always been, I think anybody that writes romance is usually someone that's been obsessed with romance for a long time, or romance has done something for them, like whether it's like it's been their comfort, it's been their healing. Like you usually don't like come into romance cold, or at least you didn't used to. I feel like now it's so profitable that some people might want to come into it cold. But it was like I work in Afro-Latin communities, and I just couldn't find a lot of books that had the people that I was working with getting happily ever afters. And it just was like something I did just to kind of like, it was kind of therapeutic. I don't like, it was more like me kind of processing this like very difficult work that I was doing, and just like the conversations around immigrants was really toxic, as it continues to be. And as an immigrant, I just really wanted to write stories about immigrants where they were like having beautiful relationships and great sex without trauma.
I might go off a little bit what Amy said just about kind of switching genres. I started out writing, really wanting to write fantasy and science fiction, and that the first book I queried was a fantasy, and thank goodness that is not the book I debuted with. I hope I hope no one ever sees that book again. But I mean, it taught me so much about writing. But I think what I discovered was that I was always focusing so much on the romantic subplot. And I'd been obsessed with romance books for so long. And I think that was, looking back at my reading life, a trend was I was reading a lot of other genres for sure, but was kind of oftentimes looking for this romantic plot. And so then decided to try my hand at that. But I think, Michelle, you mentioned so many people have this idea, and any friends I've had or people who have asked just about writing, I feel like I would definitely say if you're really, really struggling with something, to maybe pivot and maybe try to write nonfiction, right? Maybe like you were saying, or try to write something in a different genre. I think that you can discover so much about that. And if there's something that you're focusing on, maybe that's where you should be living.
I think all of you touched so greatly on just like the different ways inspiration can come in. And, you know, for sure, anybody who is aspiring to write or is writing, but just needs that re-inspiration, it's great to remember that there are so many different sources of it. We got another question a couple of times that I think could also be fun for all of you. But like, what are your favorite romance tropes? We're talking about tropes all the time, and I think readers are really interested. Like, if any of you have favorite tropes to write or favorite themes to incorporate again and again for whatever reason, like what, if you have any of those, what are they, and what makes you love using them so much as a writer?
I love fated mates. That's my favorite trope. Usually the book I read is they meet, one of them is like obsessed from the first like moment they see them, and their life instantly starts falling apart. So that's like what I love to read. I mean, I enjoy enemies to lovers. I feel like when it's really well done, it's probably one of the best tropes. Friends to lovers also. Like, I think it's like a different kind of dynamic. It's more like a yearning as opposed to like explosive. But yeah, I mean, I would say I love all tropes. I like to write tension. So I like rivals to lovers, or like people that are at odds. Um, but the one that I really is not my thing is Secret Baby. That's just like Secret Baby's hard for me personally. I have enjoyed some, but it's not one that I think I'll ever write. But other than that, like I'm pretty much like up for I think most tropes work for me um with the right story.
Adriana, you mentioned yearning, and that's one of my, I feel like we're starting to see more of that. I love a romantic lead who yearns. I feel like we need to see more yearning. I don't know how many people are watching the new season of The Summer I Turned Pretty, but there's so much discourse out there right now about how Conrad is this like yearning man, and I love that we're talking about that a little bit. Because I love to see a romantic lead who yearns. Um, I also really love enemies to lovers, but I feel like I'm really terrible at writing it because I think that there's a there's a difficult line you toe there, right? Where it's like they have to like each other enough to end up together. So that's something I've struggled with, but I love reading a good enemies to lovers when it's written well. I agree, it's one of the best for sure.
Oh, um, I I love I love all the tropes, really, reading them, but of late, definitely I love writing friends to lovers. And I think it's because I got married again, and it was a friend that I knew years ago that I did not realize this man was so handsome. And I was like, "Where were you all my life? You were right there." So I fell in love with that trope, and I absolutely love writing the friends to lovers trope. There's just something about it, the groundwork is there, the friendship is there, and then building off of that.
I like just trying something different. That's why I think like 9 Month Contract is a surrogacy romance, because I'm like, I don't think there's enough surrogacy romance out there. Bet I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna make this work. I'm gonna make it contemporary. And I like the idea of kind of twisting the single dad wannabe trope a bit. So, he's a single guy who wants to be a dad. So that's my 9 month contract. I also think the pregnancy trope gets a lot of unnecessary hate. Okay. I think it can be very well done. Um, and the pregnancy trope is different than secret baby. Like secret baby is someone had a baby and didn't tell the partner, right? And then later it's revealed. But like surprise pregnancy is different, where the couple finds out they're having a baby, or one of them tells the other guy, yeah, I'm pregnant, and then they have to work it out. I like pregnancy trope because it kind of forces intimacy right away. Like, you have doctor's appointments, it's like all about her body, things like that. I just think that sets up such a great like base for reasons that they have to bond. So I need to write another pregnancy trope. It's been a while. So yeah, I like them all though. I think variety is the spice of life. So I'll take whatever. I'll make whatever work.
I love that you all have a different favorite trope. And it's interesting how our favorite tropes like say, kind of give an indication of like what we're all feeling. We're at time, and I mean there's so many other great questions, but like we could probably be here forever talking about this, since this is something that we're all embedded in all the time. But I think a great way to end would be I mean we have a lot of great questions, but there's one where folks are just curious about where you get your inspiration from, and I think that will be really helpful to aspiring authors. So if you could talk about where you get your inspiration from a little bit, that would be great. And I also think since we're nearing the end, like after you finish your answer, please also tell everyone where they can find you on the internet, etc., so they can make sure to follow you and kind of continue to watch all of your really great careers. And of course, as a reminder to everyone watching this panel, if you have books that you want to pick up from all these panelists, like please consider going to, you know, your favorite like local independent bookstore for Bookstore Romance Day or beyond, and like supporting not just everyone here, but, you know, romance in your local community. So anyway, like final question is like, where do you get your inspiration from? And then tell us where we can find you and how we can follow all of you throughout your amazing careers.
Are we going back down the line? Sorry, I'll start us off.
We can do whatever, but this
whatever works. Okay. um, Inspiration for me, I mean, I think it comes from so many different places. I think a really important thing that I learned, particularly writing Friends to Lovers, is to put the book down and go live your life. And I think so much inspiration comes from those moments where you kind of force the project out of your brain, which is maybe one of the hardest things in the world. I think I saw Rin and Joni everywhere when I was writing that book. It was so hard for me to shut them off. But I think that's really important. I'm a huge just consumer of TV and music and movies, and music is huge for me. That's really important in my writing process. It's very central to this book. But there are so many amazing people creating amazing things out there. And so just continuing to read, to consume these things, I think is one of my biggest sources of inspiration. And I also think you kind of never know where it's going to come from. So I think that's why it's so important to just remember to step outside whatever the current project is, and take a look around at the world around you. Travel if you can. If not, you know, go on a walk or something. And I am most often on Instagram at Sally Blakely, but I'm also at sallyblakely.com. That's where you can find me. Thank you so much for having me today.
Inspiration from everything. I read a lot. I think if you're writing romance, you should be reading a lot of romance. So I reread a lot. I read a lot of what's out there. I like to know what's happening. Also, romance is one of my great joys. But like television shows, like I'm obsessed with The Gilded Age since it came out, and this season everyone else seems to have realized that it's like the best show on television. So like I'm very inspired by it. Like it's been an inspiration to me like the first few seasons as I was writing my historical. So I mean like media usually. I think pop culture and romance are so tied that I think, you know, if you write it, you're usually kind of like aware of what's happening around movies. And you can find me the easiest ways to my website at herreraromance.com. And then my newsletter is where you probably get more direct updates of what I'm doing, but also Instagram.
Yeah, I love all the pop culture. I love consuming media too. I'm really good at watching TV, really good. Also like I'm such a verbal processor when it comes to my stories. John can attest to that. They are my editor and help me with all the things. Like I'll send you like long 5-minute voice rants of like I am like overwhelmed and I need to just get this out, and then it just helps recenter me. Like the replies are great, but sometimes just getting it out helps clear my brain and help me see the bigger picture so that I can see the forest through the trees, so to speak. So yeah, but I totally get inspiration from all over. I put a lot of my real life stuff in my books, you know, just because I can't help it. If something funny happens, like my family and friends know that everything is fodder for books. So nobody is safe around me. Every like little funny quirk or characteristic that I can steal of theirs without obviously invading their, you know, privacy, it just makes my stories have such a little element of realism to them. And I think like it's really fun to see it play out in a fictional world occasionally. So yeah, I definitely think, you know, real life and experiencing things and getting out of your office a little bit, like Sally said, helps a lot. So, and I'm all over the social media as well under Amy Daws author. My website has all the links. I'm on Instagram and TikTok a lot. So yeah.
For me, you know, I piggybacking off of what a lot of people said, the fellow author said, I get inspiration. A photo once inspired me. A line from a movie, a TV show 911 once inspired me. I just get inspiration even from conversations, from experiences with my friends. I get inspiration from all over, but I definitely always go back to different movies as well. I always go back to different movies, like for our TV shows, for example, Enemies to Lovers, the season of Bridgerton. That was one of the best Enemies to Lovers I've seen. It was so well crafted. So I went out, but I went from studying and watching the characters and what brought them to get the bee. Come on, man, that bee thing was amazing, you know. So anyway, so I thought that was great, and I am a big fan of the Gilded Age or Some Have Turned Pretty. So I try to watch a lot of things. It helps keep my conversation a little fresh, I think, as well. But anyway, so that's where a lot of my inspiration comes from, as well as having wonderful men in my life, as well as having wonderful friends in my life, and that does help me craft friendship and wonderful men. Um, to find me, MichelleLindo-Rice.com is the easiest way, but I am everywhere. And I'm making a plug as well for our indie stores. For example, Riches in Reading, they're online. Look them up. You can have a with my book. I was able to go to page 158 in North Carolina, and they were amazing and wonderful there. So support your indie stores, etc. I think there's links in the chat. That's one of the best ways in which you can support us as authors, but also our indie stores. So, and you can find me. People inbox me, people email me, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle, Adriana, Sally, Amy, and to everyone who came here today. Like, Harlequin Trade Publishing is just so grateful to have had this opportunity and to get a chance to chat with all of you. And definitely, please, I think, Michelle, your missive there is so on point, is like, support your indie bookstores, you know, and if you have a local indie bookstore, if they don't stock romance, talk to them about stocking it. If they do stock romance, make sure that you ask them to stock a diverse section, ask them to stock your favorite authors, ask them to invite your favorite authors. Like, you know, the best way that readers and other writers can support each other is through that process of just like being as vocally enthusiastic as possible about what you want, and then, you know, and then making those purchases and supporting everyone, or going to the library, or doing whatever you can. So yes. So I think, like, you know, just remember that, like, that continued support is really makes such a difference for everyone in the romance community. So, you know, again, thank you all for on behalf of Harlequin Trade Publishing, and, you know, please continue to check out all of our wonderful authors, not just here, but everyone else that's on the Harlequin list. And, you know, we hope you enjoy the rest of your romance bookstore day.
Thank you all so much. Thanks, John, and all of our authors, and thank you to Harlequin Trade. I hope everybody in the audience is going forth to visit their local indie bookstore, either in person or online, and buy some romance. We will see you at further panels this weekend. Thank you all, and have a great day.